You are now listening to the Grio's Black Podcast Network, Black Culture Amplified.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Writing Black, the Grio's podcast for Black writers, thinkers, and doers. And this week we have an incredible guest. Her name is Maiysha Miller. You may recognize her as the co-host of CBS Saturday Mornings, and she's got an incredible memoir called Belonging. This book is striking in so many ways, and I'm so excited to talk to Maiysha about it. Maiysha, welcome to Writing Black.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm thrilled to have you. Belonging really struck me. You know, the subtitle in this book is A Daughter's Search for Identity Through Loss and Love. But this is a big, rich story of a big, rich life with a singular thread, a singular missing thread, I suppose is the best way to describe it, as the circumstances of your birth were very unique in that not only were you born mixed race, but you were born as, I guess, part of a clandestine relationship that was kept clandestine by your mother. And
my father.
And your father. You're right. And your father, too. And this exploration, you really take us back from the very beginning to now.
As a child, the only detail I'd known about the woman who birthed me was that she wasn't Black, which, on confronting my light pigment and pointed features in the mirror each day, had left me to assume she was white. As I grew older, the unsolved mystery of my mother inclined me towards chasing the answers. This might explain why a career in journalism called out to me.
But, you weave in so much incredible history, American history, which, your family is also very entrenched in, both the family you were born into and the family you have made since. So I really want to get into it. This presumably started with a segment that you produced about your personal history, at least as I understand it. Like, tell me how this came about, this memoir.
So the assignment, I'm going to start with a little saying I've been saying a lot.
Okay.
The assignment was understood, right? And my producer, a week after the death of George Floyd, called me on the phone. This was in the middle of COVID. And he said, I need you to give your perspective on all of the police shootings, killings, community unrest around policing. You've had such a rich history. It dates back to 1992 and the unrest surrounding the acquittal of the elite four, those police officers who beat Rodney King. And so I pulled my phone out. I dictated a script into the phone stream of consciousness, and there was 20 seconds in the middle of this in the middle of this piece where I said, racism has impacted me since the day I was born. And I told my origin story in 20 seconds. And my producer said, are you sure you want to do this? And I said, I think so. And it aired. Gayle King had wait, what you talking about, Willis? Moment with me after the piece aired. And then 37 minutes after the piece aired, a HarperCollins publisher emailed me saying that was unbelievable. That's a book, and I'd love to publish it for you.
Wow. For our listeners who are unfamiliar with your origin story, you were born to a prominent Black doctor in Los Angeles, Dr. Ross Matthew Miller. And a hospital administrator who was Chicana, whose name was Laura. Is that her real name, or is that a pseudonym? Laura Hernandez.
It's a pseudonym.
It's a pseudonym. Okay. To a woman we will call Laura Hernandez. A love story, but unfortunately, Dr. Miller was already married, and even more unfortunately, your mother's family rejected the idea of her being in a relationship with a Black man, and thus the rest unfolds. And you, during your childhood, only consciously remember seeing her, once, twice that you remember?
Yes.
Until you find her. later in life. And, I don't want to spoil too much of the book because the book is definitely worth reading. But, it's so striking, this idea of motherhood and identity and the expectations we have around what both of those things mean. I think a lot of us take for granted that we know where we come from, for better or worse. We may not be able to trace our, as Black Americans, we may not be able to trace our identity very far, but to have those questions literally from the very beginning, to not even know, why am I this complexion? Why is my hair like this? You recount a very early incident where you become aware of the effects of colorism in the book.
Yes.
And how traumatic that was. And it seems to shade a lot of what happens afterwards in terms of how you interact. So in writing this book and revisiting a lot of those, I guess, early revelations, early traumas, like, what was that experience like? I know you had a collaborator, Rosemary Robotham. So I want to shout her out because we love the collaborators.
I do every chance I get. I tried to write this book by myself, and I tell you, being a journalist does not give you prerequisite to write a memoir like this. So
I love that you say that.
She was just absolutely brilliant in this process.
So what was the process like in terms of, like, kind of excavating?
So, it really was excavating because, we remember our past in a way that's often nostalgic. We forget the bad and remember the good. And Rosemary, in a way, was the excavator of my memory and the excavator of what people have questioned me about all my life. And it was like we were on this adventure together. And it's so interesting because when she describes how I went about telling these stories, it was very clinical. And I tell these stories in a very third person, unemotional way. And I wonder why, I'm starting now with this aha moment of like, wait a minute, you aren't, like, people ask me, was it therapeutic? Was it cathartic? And I say to them, I don't know. I didn't have moments or fits of triggering that elicited, these emotional outbursts or these crying sessions or any of that. And I don't know if that's because I compartmentalized it in a way that I've kept it, how I process it, how I see it, how I analyze it in a way that, I am this child who was hidden. I am my mother's secret to this day. I am unacknowledged. And for me, I have come to the epiphany that acknowledgement matters to me. And perhaps why I'm the journalist that I am is because acknowledgement matters to me, and I think it matters a lot to a lot of different people. And the people in our society that often are unacknowledged, whether it be their history, their contributions, their presence, their affinity, their nurturing, all of these things I think matter to many people. And I, as a journalist, pick up on those often undiscovered stories, those undiscovered, marginalized communities that have not been acknowledged for whatever reason.
I want to talk more about that because I think that juxtaposition of being a journalist and writing a memoir is so striking to me. It's so interesting. And we are here to talk about the craft of writing as much as anything else. So we will be right back in a moment with more Writing Black and more Michelle Miller. We are back with Writing Black, and our guest today is Michelle Miller, the incredible award-winning host of CBS Saturday Mornings, where she sits at the desk with her co-hosts. We've become, I think we feel like we know people when we see them, behind an anchor desk. We all feel like we know you. So this story, I think it's so interesting to me that you were talking about compartmentalizing, because to me, there's like a lot of vulnerability here. And I think, and maybe that's a credit to Rosemary teasing that out. I also know that as journalists, we're all so often told not to be the story, right? Like, we're not the story. And I know that early on in your career, back when you were starting out as an intern in my hometown of Minneapolis.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. Honey, you had me with the Prince anecdotes. I was.
Oh, yes, baby. Oh, I want to You know what my opening? One of the chapters were, "How can you just leave me standing?
Yes. Yes.
Alone in a world that's so cold."
Yes. Yes.
We were just worried that the line was just too rich.
Yeah. Yeah.
Owned by Prince's estate.
That's true. Yeah, you would have gotten all kind of red tape with that. But yes, absolutely on that. And I laughed my way through all of those little. They paralleled so many of my own experiences.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Did you meet Prince too?
I had a similar encounter. I did.
Oh
it's
my
kind of hard to
gosh,
grow up in
really?
Minneapolis and not. But yeah.
But you have to tell me yours.
Well, mine was a little less. Yours was very direct and hilarious. Mine was a little more like it was more like a stop, scan up and down, observe, smirk, and then he kind of drifted away, like like on a cloud of purple, like a purple cloud or something. He just kind of floated off into the ether.
Oh my gosh! You know why I'm glad you said that? Sometimes I was sitting there thinking, especially since people remember things differently, that wait, did I imagine part of that? Did that really happen?
No, it happened. It sounded just like him.
happened.
It sounded like so many Prince sightings over so many years that so many of my friends and I have had, because he really was a human walking amongst us, and he was one of my heroes. So again, you and I have that in common, that Princess Identity, that very early, the older cousin introducing you to that music and it having this kind of profound meaning and thread through your life. But speaking of, again, back to the journalistic part of this, obviously you're used to doing research. You're even used to, you're used to even researching your own family. And I want to double back to that as well, because that's another really gripping chapter about your father. But I love that you talked about the difference between writing a memoir, something so personal, and the work that, we do daily in terms of just like the fact finding and the, what surprised you most about that process, like of having to be the subject, having to put yourself on the page.
Well, how hard it is, as I mentioned, to excavate from yourself. And what Rosemary, through the process, was defined as questioning and re-questioning the same topics over and over again. So I think it was to clarify and to make sure the accuracy of the memory was there.
Yeah.
And also to hear the ways we describe ourselves in the past. And I'm sure that there was certainly overlap in the anecdotal and the accuracy of the memory, but then the shades of emotion or lack thereof in how you tell the story.
Yeah.
And it's almost like a different voice. Maybe I would tell the story in a way that alluded or elicited perhaps some more insight about what that meant. And so like the weaving of emotion with the weaving of the story and how it happened, with the weaving of how it was perceived, with the weaving of what the stand back moment really encapsulated. And I think that, she had to pull all of this from my memory. I don't journal.
Yeah, me either.
I don't do it.
I'm a writer who does not journal. Yeah, me too. Yeah.
I know. It's like I'm a bad person. I'm a diarist. So I keep elaborate what I did. I don't talk about my feelings. And maybe therein lies a clue to how my compartmentalization works. Because I am able to cover some of the most horrific stories over the last 30 years. And I'm not even a war correspondent, so I can't even say that has entered the fray. So I don't cover war, but I cover strife, and I cover pain, and I cover violence in a way that some people equate it in much the same way. And yet I'm able, I think about, there is no school shooting to me that was more horrific than Sandy Hook.
Yeah. Because it was a tipping point, obviously, also for America.
20 babies. Babies. And at the time, my daughter was the same age and the same grade. And so the impact to me and the parallel as I was covering it, and then my daughter's school being as wide open. I mean, anybody could have walked on the campus.
Yeah.
Just like all of those things. And yet it didn't hit me in the way that it hit some of my colleagues. And then I think about the Emanuel 9 juxtaposed as somebody walking into a church, you know, because I covered that directly.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't directly cover the shooting in Pittsburgh in the synagogue, but it was the same situation. Walking in, praying with those people who welcomed him in. And then and the historic nature of that church.
Yeah.
All of that. So I think the clue for me was that I compartmentalize well. So when people ask me, was it therapeutic? I think it was more enlightening for me.
Right.
I glean knowledge about myself and how I deal with life and deal with disappointment, deal with absence, deal with expectation, deal with moving through, getting back up.
I mean, it all is very tenuous. I want to talk a little bit more about personal history in a second. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with Michelle Miller and more Writing Black. All right, we're back with our guest today, Michelle Miller and Writing Black. And we were just talking about, we were talking about so many things. We talked about Prince.
Discovery.
We were talking about discovery. Yes. And, one of the things I love about your memoir, which, let's show our listeners again, is Belonging with your lovely face on the cover. I was really struck by how artfully you and Rosemary wove in these facets of American history along with your own history. This juxtaposition of your personal story, which is unfolding. You were a native, of South Central LA. So, when you talk about, Rodney King, it's like you were literally there, blocks away from that happening. Your father, and this is so striking to me, that your father, who was not only a doctor attending to patients, but was also a race man, as we like to call them, and was a person of the people and campaigned alongside Robert Kennedy and was the first person on the scene attending to him when he was fatally shot, right? And that you, at the challenge of your son, helped to excavate his story as well. You talk about restoring him to the record. And I just was so struck by that, and we'll get into the fact that you also are part of another huge, Black American dynasty. We'll get into that in a second. But I did really feel that this was almost as much his biography as yours in a weird sort of way. And I love that. Yeah.
Yes.
He reminded me that in college, he had worked as a biology and chemistry tutor and served food in the campus cafeteria, saving every penny to make the same trip in the year between graduating pre-med from Howard and returning to pursue his medical degree there. He'd often shared that traveling the world alone as a Black man had left him with an unshakable belief that he was equal to whatever life might send his way. In emboldening me now to explore regions as yet unknown to me, he trusted I would strengthen my own resilience and resourcefulness too.
Tell me why that was important to you.
So this book really is, I think people miss, I don't correct them as often as perhaps I should. The book is a love story to my father and my grandmother as much as it is a showcase of the absence that I felt from the void I felt from the absence of my mother. And I think people harp on the mother part and don't really highlight the part about all those other people that started with my grandmother and father and my Aunt Edna. Who filled in the blanks, who filled those voids, who were present, who stayed, who nourished me, who nurtured me, who raised me, who lifted me up. And I think that, I made mistakes with not acknowledging those people. And there were many people throughout my life that I never will get back. Like, many have passed on. And this is really my attempt to share. Don't do not make the mistake I did and not showcase the people who are in your life who made a difference for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's number one. And number two, it goes back to acknowledging how weaved into the history of America we are as a people. And I have always fought to be seen. I mean, I'm seen in one way and perhaps not another. And sometimes I'm not really clear on how I'm seen.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly I did not feel seen at the time, or seen as the way I wanted to be seen professionally. I was a green rookie correspondent when I started at CBS News, and there were a lot of people who helped me remain long enough so that I could shine and really given an opportunity to shine.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first story, that dare from my son. It was a dare from my son for me to get on the computer at the point in time when the information was there.
Right.
So it was 45 years after the death of Robert Kennedy, and more documents have been released by the FBI, by the LAPD.
Right.
Then to go to, and then finding that note in exchange for a ride from the hospital back to the hotel where Robert Kennedy was shot, my father agreed to an interview to 2 CBS News correspondents.
Yeah.
And I went in the next day, and the producer that I had started working with saw me. When I say that, he listened to me. He was like one of the first people to really like hear me at my level. And he said it was worth a try. I said, you think we could find this? And he was like, oh, it's worth a look. And then he sent somebody else. So that was Jonille Adriano, shout out. Anam Sadiq, shout out, who then was like a news associate, and she scoured through, I think, something like 48 hours worth of tape.
Wow.
Right? And then found that 7 minutes.
Can you describe the senator's wounds?
Well, they were a mass of blood, and he had head injuries. The extent of them could not be ascertained immediately.
Can you imagine scouring tape?
I've done it. Yeah.
Right. And so what I'm saying to you is it took people, like, they invested in me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the boss to say, yes, tell that story, not knowing what we would find. It was incredible when I think about it.
Yeah.
Because I found the guy that he went to the hospital with.
There's still a dent there. The bullet went into the first layer skull and out.
And then I found the photographer. And then the gold mine. The gold mine was finding the picture that placed my father at the scene. There in the corner, standing just outside of Kennedy's room, Dr. Miller.
Yes, it's him. That's him.
That's in 2013 that I tell this story. But remembering to Rosemary in 2021 and 2022, that my grandmother used to always talk about how we landed the same day and had to wait on the tarmac that Robert F. Kennedy's body was flown back east. Now that's a little piece of gold.
Yeah.
And it's true. It's like, and there are all of these incredible serendipitous moments in my life like that that are so unbelievable. And I tell people, you have them too. Either you don't remember them or you haven't made the connection.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to share that there is magic all around us.
Absolutely. And I definitely think that is a huge takeaway from belonging. Like, as much as it's a poignant and in many ways sad story, it's also a really inspiring one. And I want to talk about that more. We're going to come back in just 1 second and talk more about Belonging by Michelle Miller. We're back with Michelle Miller and More Writing Black. Michelle, we were just talking about magic being all around, and you really have had. What I love about this book that as much as, yes, there's a sense of a lost child, being a bit adrift, and I think that you are very conscious of that throughout the telling of the story. Also, you land always where it's a reminder, I think, to all of us that you land where you're supposed to land, right? You find your people, you build your families, Even what you were just saying about all the people who made a family for you, all these mothers who showed up in the absence of your biological mother, whether it be Vandella, who, basically, gave up her life to come and be surrogate mother to you, or your grandmother, or Aunt Edna, or any of these amazing women, these mentors, because a lot of us don't get mentorship the way that we would hope to. And then there is the family that you built. So, what are the odds that you are going to, as a reporter, for people who are unfamiliar with how reporters work, it's a lot like, I kind of feel like it's like the draft or something, you kind of end up in the city that
Yes, that's very much like it.
Yeah, it's like the NBA
You
draft.
go where the
we want you,
opportunity-
right? Exactly. And you end up in New Orleans, and there is at that time, history has been made by the youngest mayor in the city's history, who is a second-gen mayor because his father was the first Black mayor of that city. We're talking about Marc Morial, who we now know is your husband. But the odds of this happening, this particular this unfolding of this relationship, I think, is another bit of magic in a magical city, in a magical place. And you really kind of reckoning with what that means. And of course, in that sense, you're marrying into a very established, very entrenched family. And here you are as kind of at this point, a very independent, person who is living, solo apart from your family.
Right.
How was that telling your love story? I think that's to me, that would be probably the most personal, but oddly enough, but
for me, it was really a moment to set the record straight because people have wondered how that occurred.
Oh,
and it was it was serendipitous in moments where oh, wait a minute. For instance, how we met, what connections we had, his comms director was my across the street neighbor's best friend's daughter. She told me that the minute I went to City Hall and was part of a press conference with the mayor, who showed up 45 minutes late, and I'd already had kind of words with, in a rapid fire Q&A from the press corps on my first day. And she invited me to an event. I went to the event, and I didn't realize it was a fundraiser, so I hightailed it out. And he was coming up the stairs. He was like, "Where are you going?" "I'm leaving." He was like, "Will you have a ride?" I was like, "No, I'm going to catch a cab or walk back." And the quarter was a dangerous place at that time. New Orleans was the murder capital of the world at that time. And he's like, "No, give me 5 minutes. I'm going to make sure you get back." And so he and his driver, the two of them in the front seat, me in the back, in the middle, like a little kid, he gave me a ride back to the station and pulled all the way in. And I get in the mayor's car. Can you imagine what that looked like?
yeah.
And so the rumors were flying left and right. And I remember.
And you're the new girl. You're the new girl in town.
I'm the new girl,
Gosh.
right? And so, and what was hilarious about it at the time, well, what's hilarious now, and there's so much hilarity in this book tour, because let me tell you what's come out of the book tour. One, the man who helped me find my mother, I hadn't seen in 30 years. He happened to be in Atlanta for a book signing, and he showed up. So that was a reconnection. Also at that book signing, my father's babysitter from Compton, California. She lives in Atlanta now. She shows up. Then I get a call from the reporter who I worked with in New Orleans at the time, and he remembers all of these things that did not happen. And so I had to kind of set the record straight. I was like, that's not how it went down.
And see, and that to me is the power of memoirs, being able to set the record straight. I mean, I think people think of a memoir as I get to tell the story the way I wanted to tell it. To an extent, yes, but as journalists, we still deal in facts, and so I'm interested in that for sure. We're gonna take a quick break, but we're gonna be back with more Writing Black and more with our guest Michelle Miller. And we are back with more Writing Black. What has that meant to you in terms of this incomplete narrative, obviously with your biological mother, and now being able to start your own family?
I was explaining to people how you feel differently about things through a process. And when I started the book, even before I started the book, I think of my mother in waves of in time spans. From 0 to 20, there was it's absence. I don't know, the wonder, right? When I met her, there was I understand. I can't fault her. I might have made a similar choice. But when I have my children and her lack of acknowledging them, that's when it became personal. And that's when I think the seed of anger started to well in me and swell. And then 10 years later, when I asked her after everyone that she claimed she loved had died, the people who really mattered to her, her mother, her father, her husband, why she couldn't acknowledge me to her family then. And she said to me, because they would think I'm a liar. And how I answered that was really crushing, I think, to her. Cruel, she said. And so I think that you, and I even feel differently now than perhaps I did 7 years ago. And that I'm okay. I get it. I am just, I think the bottom line, the win out of my belonging is that I'm here.
Yeah.
The win is I had a family that raised me, and that some kind of way, they instilled ambition. They instilled a keen sense of perseverance, a incredible work ethic, and the will to look at the sunny side up, the glass half full, and as my Aunt Edna would always say, you have to make your own self happy.
I love that. I love that so much. We're going to take a final break, and we'll be back with Michelle Miller and more Writing Black. Michelle, we were just talking about joy, and I loved what you were saying about that, because I do think it's so easy for us to get caught up in the minutia of our lives now and not think of the broad strokes of how we've gotten here, how we're able to get here. And I do want to talk about someplace that I'm going to call for you, perhaps, and for a lot of people I know, the Mecca of joy, which is Howard University.
You
know. Now, I did not go to Howard. It was my number 2. I almost went. My sister did. But I have a very soft spot for Howard because it was such a huge part of our family life. And I know you did as well. You were a third generation to go to Howard.
I am.
And you went with some names that we would recognize. You
Yes.
were roommates with Wendy Raquel Robinson, who many of us, have grown up watching on television. Although I'm not that much younger than you, so there's that part. But this
Sean P. Combs.
There you go.
Tom Hardy.
Kamala Harris was a senior when you were a freshman.
Yes, she was. That's three. That's 3 pretty good ones right there.
I think that's
pretty
it's
good.
Very impressive.
Hey, Mark Mason, CFO of Citigroup. Chief Financial Officer, yes, indeed. Let's give a big shout out.
It is
Charles
the Mecca for a reason,
Physicians, there are a lot of folks.
Yeah, and I guess what I wanted to touch on, because I know a lot of our audience also has a soft spot for Howard, whether personally or just because it's legendary. When we talk about this search for identity, now obviously this was already part of your family legacy. This is what you wanted to do, but in that sense of here you are, obviously a mixed race person who's grown up in a Black world, like predominantly, you've always been juxtaposed as a Black person. But what did Howard do for you in terms of further kind of defining that identity and giving you your place in the world?
It rooted me in the absolute awesomeness of our history. The first course at Howard University that I took that really impacted me was History of the Black Diaspora. And what I learned, how far back into antiquity Africans and their journey throughout the world had been, and how impactful and how monumental it is. And I'm talking beyond Egypt. I'm talking sub-Saharan Africa. I'm talking the Iron Age. I'm talking, and then I think about our history within the United States and what we did through our labor, but through our skill set. And I think the fallacy of people not understanding that we were kidnapped based on our skill set. The artisans, the craftsmen, the architects, the farmers, like our skill set was determined on what we could do to bring back to this country, and how we could. It was labor, but it was specific labor. It was specific know-how, and then everything that we did here, despite our enslavement, despite our second-class citizenship, despite all the things that tried to keep us down, still we rise. I am in Washington, D.C., and I am looking out on the Tidewater Basin with the beautiful cherry blossoms, the Jefferson Memorial. And I think about a man named Benjamin Banneker, who was an apprentice of Charles L'Enfant, who was an incredible architect from France that we had hired to, make this city. And he left with the plans back to France when the Americans refused to pay him. Right? And
can you blame him?
They were like, what are we going to do? And Benjamin Banneker said, oh, I remember. And then he's the same guy who argued with Thomas Jefferson about the absolute inhumanity of slavery and how hypocritical his Declaration of Independence was with how he was living post-presidency in his Monticello. And so I think about Benjamin Banneker, who was this child born into a Quaker family and created a life of himself and fought for his people with his utter brilliance and determination and the power that he had. And we continuously did that all the way through to today. And so that is what I gained from Howard University, that education. Now, that education is all over this country in PWIs, predominantly white institutions as well. And I thank them for creating a space and place for our history. But we need to tell our history.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure our children understand. So they are proud of who they are. They have no shame in the game of their identity. And it was funny. I was with Michael Eric Dyson. He did a Q&A at one of the book signings.
We love him. Yes.
And he said, I'm at an HBCU. He said, homeboy cutting up, because he's cutting up, letting folks know the history in his new place of Vanderbilt University. I thought that was really funny. So I'm going to take that one on the road with me. He is a card, always. Okay,
so you and I have established, now what I love it. First of all, I love this book. So, I really want our listeners to
Do you really
engage.
love the book?
I do really love it. I really got into it. When I find myself reading a book and wanting to return to it, it's always a good sign. And I read a lot of books because I host this podcast.
I know
so there
you
you go. What I don't know what I expected to find in this book. I don't know what I was, but I was definitely drawn in. I saw so much of myself in it, so many parallels, just, generationally and culturally. And I think that anybody who engages with this book, it has something to give them. So I
wanted
hope that
it to resonate beyond me.
Yes.
I wanted it to, because I think my story is so many other people's stories.
Yeah.
Even to the point where I happened to be on the set with someone like Bryan Cranston, and I discovered that his origin story as a child, his parents his father had abandoned him.
Oh, wow.
And so, it was a moment of like, here's this guy. No one knows that story about him. And yet it's something we share. And I think that people, hopefully they're going to grow from this. They're going to search their identity in many ways. And I want it to be a bridge.
Yeah, and I definitely think it has that potential. Now, I'm going to ask you a question that we, as we wrap up this very lively and very fun conversation, I'm going to ask you a question I ask all of our guests because I do think it's important. We have already established, you and I, that we do not journal, for better or worse. We do not journal. But what do you read? Like, what writers do you gravitate towards? What storytellers do you love?
You're going to think I'm really funny, but so my favorite book is Carl Sagan's Contact.
Oh my! I mean, I love the movie, so there you go.
And Arthur C. Clarke's 2010.
Okay.
And then I'm gonna just admit that I am a glutton for romance novels.
Oh. That's, you know what? It's fine. We've had some romance novels on this show. Some really great ones. And listen, Stacey Abrams is a romance novelist. So there you go. Like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? We are full.
Oh my gosh. I don't even want to tell you the titles that come to mind.
It's okay. So you like a good bodice ripper, like a good, like.
Okay. I love the reimagining of the Bridgertons on screen.
They are fun. For whatever liberties they take with history and colonialism, they are fun. And, I look forward to us
liberties. They're reimaginings.
I agree.
That are based in some way, shape, or form on an element of truth.
Yes.
That we
and
did
what I
have
want
a
for
Belle,
us
we did have
also,
a Queen Charlotte.
Exactly.
There are people who did live that life.
That's right.
Albeit they were few and far in between.
Yeah. I look forward to us being able to enjoy that stuff too without having to kind of like interrogate everything. I think that it's a circumstance of how we got here and how we've lived here, but I also think as you said, we deserve joy, and whatever that looks like in terms of how we cut that loose and enjoy ourselves. I'm here for it. But Michelle Miller, I have so enjoyed having you on the podcast. You were so fun. And
Thank you.
Really enjoyed belonging, and I hope that our listeners will get into this too. This is a fascinating story. So, you writing Black fans, check this out. And you can see Michelle in the meantime on Saturday mornings on CBS. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Maiysha.
I really can't say enough about how fun it was to speak with Michelle Miller, or how intriguing belonging really is. For all that we talked about in that conversation, there's so many other layers to this story. I really, really highly recommend this book. I think it's a really thoughtful and insightful look at race and class in America as we know it. But if you are looking for other books that really kind of deal with that tenuous thread that we call mother-child relationships, and the issues that arise for mixed race children in this country, Surviving the White Gaze is another memoir that's pretty amazing. This is by Rebecca Carroll, who is a tremendous writer. And this, book is both similar and different in terms of a child who was, again, brought into the world under tenuous circumstances and raised in an unconventional way, in a way that really forced them to have to investigate and excavate their own identities. So Surviving the White Gaze is another tremendous memoir that I highly recommend, but also get into belonging. And please come join us again for our next episode of Writing Black. Thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode of Writing Black. As always, you can find us on the Grio app or wherever you find your podcasts.